Hey, Barry. Yes, you're on mute.
I'm not sure why I was not allowed to unmute there at the beginning. You had that set to mute everybody, I guess.
Yeah, by default. But that was back when we used to get Zoom bombed. I guess we could remove that now.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Turn the
You ever
volume.
experienced one of those?
I think maybe once or twice I've seen people come in who were trolls or whatever. Not very often. More often it's a person we know, but they're using an ID that we don't recognize. So they're kind of put in a waiting room until they identify themselves.
Yeah, that I don't mind so much. It's the people that come and immediately send off all kinds of porn and noise and cacophony and all that static.
Yeah, the only person who ever did that to me was what's his name? The Sikh guy from London. What's his name?
Jaswinder?
Jaswinder, yeah. He actually opened, I don't know if it was a Zoom set. I know it was a Zoom session. I think it was a Messenger video. He opened a Messenger video to me and just noise bombed me for about 3 minutes. I had no idea why he was doing it. I've actually figured out why he was doing it, but it was really like, what the hell is this about?
Is there a good reason for doing that?
There wasn't in that case. I mean, he may have thought he had a good reason, but he was operating under a misconception.
That's not an episode I'm familiar with.
I didn't make a big deal out of it. I don't know if I even ever mentioned it to anybody at the time.
Yeah.
But basically, it basically severed my connect. I didn't have a strong connection with him to begin with, and that pretty much severed it.
Yeah, curious. I know he's made a couple of appearances back on Unblocking, but not here. So, by the way, just for the record, I had an interaction with Joel this morning. I
was just reading it.
And so I invited him here to present. I am skeptical he'll do so, but I just wanted to acknowledge what had gone on.
Yeah. In fact, I was in the process of adding a comment to that very thread. I only got one sentence out so far before your session started.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not against people engaging on stuff so, that we can all learn, but I am trying to put a stop to just snarky negativity. Hey, Josh. So if the only active people are you and me, Barry, I'd actually really, really, really love to get into this cluster of topics around analytical theology and science, and,
right,
etc.
Yeah.
So let's see who's here.
Yeah, I was actually on the verge of mentioning that because, as you know, I wrote a post on not the word of God, but the math of God, or theomethy, as opposed to theology. Logo meaning word and math meaning math. And I don't know if you ever attended when I presented that or not, but it's not very long.
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
So Josh, you're making muting noises or muting signals? You're not able to speak because there's a baby? Okay, all right. No, not that. Why don't you type into the chat? Wait, I muted you? That's different because I haven't done anything differently.
It said when I came on, it's gone now, but when I
Thank
came
you.
on. When I
Yeah,
came
you were-
on, it said the host is not allowing you to unmute.
Yeah, no, I had the same thing.
I
I had
didn't
the same
change
thing.
any settings. So yeah, Barry said so too. So I had to do this ask to unmute thing. So I'll have to figure that setting out. I
Thank you.
really, I'm not in the business of, showing up at a conversation and having people be mute. Okay. That's not the way I roll. Anyway, I was just saying to Barry that I was acknowledging that there's an interaction I had with Joel this morning, and I invited him to participate. And if he does, I would like for him to present and enlighten me, if not the rest of us. But unless he does that, I'm really trying to be more assertive about putting an end to snarky negativity. Now, if you believe I'm snarky and negative, put an end to me, okay? I'll engage. But I don't want to just be snarky negative with little comments and then disappear, okay? I don't think that's really mutually productive.
Should probably be a guideline that we refrain from snarkiness, period.
If we could agree on things, yes.
Well, we can agree with ourselves. We could hold ourselves to our own standards.
Well, then,
The
let's
the
do
five
so and let's
agreements.
share those standards.
The 5 agreements of, what's the guy fellow's name? Louise?
Don Miguel.
Don Miguel
Yeah.
Ruiz, yeah, which is only an agreement that you make with yourself
Right.
to adopt it. Nobody else is
You know
required
what? That's really enough, though. I mean, if I really make the agreement with myself,
Yeah.
and I'm not snarky,
Yeah.
that
it
does
diminish-
more.
It diminishes the overall likelihood, because mimesis, which is to say imitating, so somebody does something that you object to, but you respond in kind. So that kind of escalates the total amount of the thing that neither of you, or at least one of you, doesn't like. And so there's quite a challenging thing to respond to something you don't like with something that if the other person imitated it, you would like. Which means don't respond in the kind that escalates them using the thing you don't like. That's not an easy calculus to work out in your head, to come up with something innovative, creative, constructive, that diminishes the total content of things that you object to.
The easiest thing that I've found, because it is really hard to do, is to ask a question.
Or ask the best possible question.
But it does.
Question I could ask right now.
But it does 2 things. It stops me in my tracks, because
Yeah.
now I got to think of how to phrase the question.
Yeah.
And it,
Yeah.
hopefully leads to better results.
Although what's interesting is that one of my favorite responses to being asked a question is to respond with the Zen term mu, M-U. You know that,
Yeah,
Josh, Josh has a finger up. Oh, I can't read with that. What's it?
Oh, it's a picture. The host, he's showing you where we got that
Yeah, right.
message from Zoom that Zoom took upon themselves to put in, because Sam has already said he did nothing to make that happen.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's a setting at the beginning of the video to
Are
be
you,
fixed.
are you blowing kisses? What
he's-
is this?
So Josh
this
is still
charades?
muted. Can
Every time, okay, so if I click the mute button again, it won't let me unmute.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
So if I don't click the mute button, you guys have to hear all the crap that's going on around the house. But if I do click the mute button, I can't talk. And I put it in the chat and I said it twice. And I'm
I
just getting
found it.
frustrated.
I found it. If I bring up security, Sam,
Yeah.
one of the options which is not currently checked is unmute themselves. Allow participants to unmute themselves. I'm going to click that.
Why did that change?
Well, maybe they changed the default, but I've now changed. You can rename yourself. Why don't we turn that on too? You can rename yourself and you can unmute yourself. That was missing.
All right, I'll try to mute and unmute. Ready?
Yeah.
I just tried, it worked.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yep. Good old diagnostic reasoning. Check the obvious thing, the settings.
Yeah, one would only do that if there is something to diagnose. And why would Zoom give us something that we have to diagnose, you know?
Why would they change the default settings? Who the hell knows?
Yeah.
I'm sure they had a reason for it.
I mean, there's a chance that it was manually done, but I don't remember doing it.
It's very likely that they changed the default, or maybe that they added it as an option that wasn't there before, and the default was to have it not
That
checked.
makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Anyway, would we agree that the best practice would be to stop and formulate the best question before responding?
Or to do the best you can of asking a very good,
Yeah.
thoughtful, relevant, intriguing question, which is an art and a science.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is the question that always seems to arise with group quote culture, which is everybody can come and do whatever they want, okay, which is how we started. And people insisted that we keep it that way for a while. Or we actually say, over time, we've seen what works. Let's try and guide people towards that behavior.
Yep.
And yet we've not really been able to do so. I think one of the problems with social media and such open forums is behavior and values and rational thought and quality of conversation seems to diminish towards the minimum.
Yeah.
It doesn't really allow for optimal unless we provide guidelines. Yeah. And the guidelines that are objected to prevent us from leveling up. It's becoming more and more clear. We've seen it in the news media. Yep. We've seen it in just about every place where people congregate and just toss their own opinions in and demand a right to their voice.
It's called the race to the bottom. You probably heard this term, the race to the bottom, where you basically have the negative spiral, and the unthinking response is to escalate the race to the bottom. And it takes a great deal of discipline to opt out of participating in the race to the bottom.
But the problem is then the people that actually want better leave. So the general average goes down and down and down.
Exactly.
Unless we protect the space with some guidelines. And that protection word often comes across to others as power over, which oppression. I think is very misleading.
Yeah. Protection and oppression are two sides of the same coin. So when you're raising a child, a young child, you engage in parental protection. But as the child ages into adolescence, those acts of protection are now perceived by the child as acts of oppression, because you're limiting the freedom of a child who now wants more freedom than the parent is, has been allowing them.
Yeah. So I think this notion of with freedom comes responsibility is underappreciated.
Yeah, absolutely.
People think freedom just comes with just any random behavior that seems to just feel quote unquote comfortable at the moment.
The freedom of speech is the right to be rude. And in America, the right to be rude or to make fun of people is part of our culture. Yeah. In other countries, it's frowned upon, or even against the societal norms.
And yet, if rational discourse is less and less available and less practiced, mockery becomes the common behavior. Yeah. And it's not entirely inappropriate either. Look at what Jon Stewart does, and Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel, and all those people. Yeah. We resort to mockery when rational discourse fails.
Satire and parody are sort of the last vestiges of correcting the mistakes of our culture, other than war. They're certainly non-violent, although it may be verbally violent. But...
Yeah, let me tell a story, I guess. I was in California this week, and I think it was on Thursday. I visited with some friends I've known for up to 16 years. And suddenly I lost my train of thought.
You were with your friends.
Yeah, but I lost my train of thought after that. Sorry.
About mockery? Did it have to do with mockery? Did it have to do with mockery?
Mockery,
No,
satire.
I'll remember it later. Sorry, I lost momentum there.
Well, welcome to growing old. I have that all the time. Where I
Yeah,
can't remember something for one
these are
minute.
senior moments, I guess. I'm
Yeah,
having a
we're all
senior
well.
moment.
We're all becoming seniors slowly but surely,
Yeah.
or uncertainly. I don't know.
Well, let me continue. Maybe I told you guys about a week ago. This is a different story. I went down to California last week because even though I was there recently, you guys know, I think I said last week, I recently was given a lot more responsibility over 4 new departments that I previously did not have anything to do with. So I went down there to meet with the CEO and to meet with a new team and to, sort of try and hit the ground running. And it was actually a very productive week. But as a result, what am I saying? During the week, engaging in non-work, quote unquote, related activities is getting more and more difficult because of the time factor.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to really enjoy weekends because I'm still going to try and do weekends on personal projects. But any preparation I typically do during the week, such as uploading videos and creating these doc files and interacting on things, probably is going to have to be constrained to the weekends or really, really late night hours or early morning hours. But the work is actually a lot of fun. I'm probably having as much fun at work as I've ever had, and that's
Super.
That's a statement.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
it's a mechaya, as they say in Jewish culture.
Yeah, now, there was a peak I had way back in my, let's say, early 40s, late 30s. That was a pretty good time. And this is approaching and possibly even surpassing that.
Fabulous. Well, I will take vicarious thrill in that because those days are now gone, pretty much gone for me.
We can recreate them in other ways, Barry.
Well, it would be nice.
Well, for example, if we could really get going and get some momentum around some of this collaborology / analytical theology / rational thought / the calculus of ethics / the pursuit of truth
Yep.
/ leaning into the real notion of the universe / God.
Yep.
That I would really enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of fertile ground to cover in analytic theology. Systems thinking, secular systems thinking intersects analytic theology with quite a bit of overlap.
Yeah.
And also philosophy.
Right. So let me, before I leave my prior point, just say, as I take a stand on trying to minimize snarkiness and negativity and just, bird droppings, let me know if you actually think I am guilty of the same. I will definitely be receptive to that because I do want to put an end to it, including from myself. I know at times, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Joel is looking for a link and I don't know how to send it, so.
Let me
Is
see
he
if I
in
can.
Messenger? Oh, there he is.
Yes.
Yeah, I can give it to him, I think. Let's see.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah, good.
Actually, oh yeah, you can pull it right off of, if you go up to the upper left, that little green thingy in the upper left of the window,
Yeah.
it brings up the link.
Oh, okay. Copy link. I hadn't been monitoring Messenger, so I have not seen his request.
It just happened. It was only, that's why I interrupted you.
Okay, all right. Good. Yes, good. Let's welcome Joel.
Yes, but I have a quick question. How would you like to be notified of your snarkiness? Through
Just tell me-
email,
Just tell,
telephone?
no, don't just say, hey,
Raise my
Sam.
hand.
Just say, Sam, you're being snarky and negative.
Well, did you notice that I smiled when you said bird droppings?
Yes?
Because bird droppings, I'm not sure exactly what that metaphor was a reference to, but it sounded snarky. So I kind of chuckled when you said that.
Well, it's coming in, shitting and flying away.
Yeah. I mean, but the expression bird droppings is kind of a snarky characterization, I suppose.
Yeah, okay. I'll take that. I'm guilty of that,
Yeah.
but I'll own that and I won't retract that.
Yeah, it's fine. I just thought it was kind of humorous. It's right in the middle of
Yeah.
you crying at.
Wait a minute. Do I have to unmute anybody?
Here's Joe.
Let me test. I'm gonna mute myself and then I'll try to. No, it's good.
Okay, good.
Is
All right.
anybody in the waiting room? Oh, here he is.
Yeah, I
Joel,
think
welcome. How are you? Joel,
he hasn't got his audio.
yeah, let
turned
me
on.
ask him to unmute.
Let me try.
Hey, Joel, if you're there, I just tried to ask you to unmute.
There he is.
There you are.
Hello.
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 Welcome, Joel. How are you?
Okay, doing better than I have been.
Good.
So I wanted to welcome you for interacting with me on Facebook. I would like to hear your thoughts on what I posted and engage.
Where was this interaction so that,
It's in the GCC group.
I'll give you a link to it in on
I
Facebook.
posted something, I believe it was about, the word of God being really the word of men.
I will
Oh.
just type it into the Facebook Messenger for you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Ugh,
yes.
let's
And
not
then
even
Joel
go down
said
the
something
concept
about
idea
it's either a
first.
warning or a threat. And I asked a
Yeah.
question about what's the difference. And Joel
Well,
expressed surprise that I needed that to be clarified. And I'm actually internally surprised that it wasn't clear that it needed to be clarified. So I'm very, very fascinated by what Joel will say.
There's a sign on the bridge warning it's out. A threat. No, it's a warning. Don't drive over this bridge. It's damaged and broken. You're gonna get hurt. Whereas a threat is, I'm going to hurt you. Simple distinction.
Okay, so please forgive me. I'm going to ask stupid questions. How is that mapped to the word of God and the word of men?
Well, it was extenuated onto the end of it, but the word of God is a concept, and it's not the words that's in the Bible.
Okay, so who knows the word of God?
Oof. In the Sikhs, they call it the name of God, and other belief systems use different terminology.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's not words in the same sense. It's a relationship of understanding.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Also,
so
The modern
what is
Christian
permissible
Bible,
and what is not? What relationship is permissible and what is not?
if you understand that the very high ups who created the original knowledge were doing something very similar to science.
So can I ask, because if every new utterance has new terms that I'm not familiar with, if I just let it go, then I'm presuming that I'm understanding without asking clarification. So if I ask clarification, unfortunately, it's going to disrupt your flow. So
No,
which would
feel
you
free.
prefer?
Because this is part of my point that I've kept trying to make. They're different conceptual frames. Science has labeled life as being this idea, but a different conceptual frame has labeled it as being another idea. And unless you understand the distinction between those two, you're not really going to understand when they both say life, they're meaning something completely differently.
But isn't clarification among conversation between us a way to understand? I can't just
Yes.
presume I understand, right?
But sometimes when someone tries to make that clarification, the teachings are ignored for an idea that the other already knows.
That's okay, right? Everybody has misunderstandings. We're trying to reach mutual understanding by breaking through those misunderstandings.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm asking these questions. So what is the proper frame I need to adopt in order to understand God and the Word of God?
How to word it? As I was saying, you got to think as if these people were pointing to something outside of them.
That's
that they were
okay. I
going.
do believe that. I accept that completely.
So when you're saying it's the words of men, you've already skipped that step.
No, I haven't.
Well, then science is just the words of men.
Correct.
But what science does is point to something outside of them. So it's not the words that's important, it's what they're pointing to
Right.
and what it suggests.
Completely agree. I'm with you so far.
Okay, so if the religions tell you that if you do these behaviors, it will lead to bad effects, is it any different to science saying if you do these behaviors, your culture will evolve into this nature?
There is one small difference I would draw, which is in science, there's always more that you can actually discover and understand. I haven't yet seen that be consistently the case in religious teachings
That's
and
because it's been
religious
distorted
pointing.
a lot between cultures, sometimes because one culture didn't want to accept the knowledge came from another culture that they saw themselves as better than.
Okay, so are you willing to suspend that disbelief that I hold that thought? I am actually very willing to understand Sikhism, Jainism, Islam, whatever it is that can help me understand. However, I'm also very willing to understand where those teachings, in a sense, are contradictory within themselves.
Okay.
Harry has something he wants to interject.
Yeah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the so-called 5 books of Moses, is also called the Torah, Torah in English transliteration. And Torah is actually just an ordinary dictionary word in Hebrew. And it's also a cognate of a corresponding Greek word. Torah means theory or science as just a dictionary word. And the corresponding Greek word is theoria, Theoria, which means I behold. So if you think about science, you're a scientific observer, you go out and say, I behold these observations that I make about the world I find myself embedded in, and I find some general principles that characterize the world. So these observations are in some sense universal. They're not my personal observations, but anybody can confirm them. So if you take the document called the Torah, which is again a Hebrew word that means science or theory, and you would translate it into a corresponding title for a document in English, I would translate the title to be Customary System of Guidance. Because for that population, that was basically a handbook for living a life that minimized pain and suffering and tragedy. That was basically your customary system of guidance, which in modern terms you think, well, ethical best practices, or the most appropriate way to go about living so that you minimize the likelihood of bad outcomes. And that's, in a sense, it's a science. It's also an art. But like any science, it's theory, it's hypotheses. It's not necessarily written in stone, and it changes with time. The best practice, the best adaptive practice is not constant. That living beings, living creatures constantly adapt to changing environmental conditions. Otherwise, they'll go extinct. Maladaptive or non-adaptive is a recipe for going extinct. By the way, you mentioned the word epistemology, Sam. The word for epistemology in Hebrew is Torah emet. And Torah is just the masculine and feminine variations. Torah emet means the science of truth. Emet, the given name emet is the word for truth. So Torah emet, the science of truth, is how you say epistemology.
And I think it still means that, which I like.
Yeah.
Then the Met is one of the names of God.
Yeah.
So let me add one more comment, okay, and try seeing if this perspective is harmful or possibly helpful. I don't actually view a dichotomy between religion and science. I actually view them on a spectrum. So when people started trying to ask questions about how the world exists and how to live in the world and how to behave and how things work. You know, let's say many years ago, there was less information available and different ways to interpret it than now. Okay, based on things like measurements and documents. Now, you could say there is different knowledge that is lost, that is not recorded, and it's that element that I am actually leaning into. I want to see what that is. Okay, but if you take a look at the stuff that's observable, the stuff that's measurable, the stuff that's recordable, there's vastly more now than there was last year and the previous year and et cetera, et cetera. So if one takes the data that's available and tries to tell a story about it, to say, this is how things work, okay? Understandably, as our model evolves, the stories that used to be told transform themselves into things that take advantage of more data and more evidence and more observations. But insisting, and I'm using a strong word here, that those stories are still true without factoring in the new data, the new observations, the new theories, is disregarding observations about the universe. It's in a sense not listening to God. It's not actually paying attention to God, because the universe is still telling us things through all of these observations. So if our stories do not evolve, what are we really doing? We're sticking with what? Elementary school stories versus possibly sixth grade, high school, college level stuff, because we now have more word of God to factor in. So that is a perspective that I'd like for us to consider.
Can I add an additional one onto that?
Sure.
Maybe old knowledge actually had that knowledge and was
But where
already
is it?
creating the stories from
Where is it?
in the Torah, in the Kabbalah, in
Okay.
the Book of the Dead.
So are we saying that we have not
texts.
evolved since then?
There's a
Some
comes a
regards we
question
have.
in that.
There's a what?
There's a question in that.
Yes.
When we look at humanity as a whole, as the 7.9 billion of us, are we all at exactly the same position of evolution? According
So that's a
to
rhetorical
science,
question, right? The answer is clearly no.
then what can that suggest? That maybe one day or previously there was people who knew and they died out, and a less knowledgeable culture who didn't see the knowledge right took over from them. And if we go to the Byzantine Christians and that era of Christianity, the Byzantines were more intelligent and developed of knowledge than the Western Christians who went and killed them.
Okay. Barry and Stacy both have their hands up.
Trying to remember what I was going to say. Go ahead, Stacy. It'll come back to me.
I was just going to insert a question. And the question is, what if every culture had a piece of what we needed to know, but because we don't speak to the other cultures, but because we've separated ourselves or looked at each other as enemies, we haven't gotten together to get the whole picture?
Yeah, I'll embrace that.
I remember what I was going to say. You know, when Carl Sagan did his series Cosmos, he introduced his definition. He says the cosmos is all that is or ever was or ever will be. That's his classical definition. All that is or ever was or ever will be. And Joel mentioned the name of God, because God is a pronoun and deities have names, the names have meanings. And the deity of the Old Testament has a name, which is traditionally not pronounced. It's too sacred to just use in vain, you know. But you can make the definition of it, and the way it's written in the original Hebrew is ungrammatical if you translate it literally into English. It's sort of like que sera sera. It's almost exactly the same as que sera sera. What is becoming, and you can take Carl Sagan's definition of the cosmos and equate it to the translation of the name of the deity of Moses. All the God of Moses is all that is or ever was or ever will be, becoming. The becoming is sort of the closest English word I can find that
That's where that
encapsulates
word came from.
Sorry?
That's where that word and idea came from, unbecoming. It
Yes,
means to
exactly.
not be becoming godlike.
And in fact, in Jehovah's Witnesses recently, 10 years ago, published a new translation of the Old Testament. And in that particular passage, they changed the translation when God reveals his name to Moses. The Jehovah's Witnesses changed it to, I am becoming who or what I am becoming, which is a tautology. I mean, the world is becoming, the cosmos is becoming what it's becoming. It's manifestly true. It may not tell you very much about what it is becoming, but it's certainly true. And so the process of becoming, or the spirit of becoming, is sort of the closest English encapsulation of divinity. So divinity is becoming something that's better, more survivable, more magnificent, more divine than what was, in the past. So
I was with you up until the word better.
Well, it's hard to find a good
Higher frequency.
Sorry, more becoming. Sorry.
I look at it as higher frequency.
Oh, possibly, yeah. But sort of becoming more becoming. I mean, it's hard to find good words in English that that don't do some violence to the spirit of the concept. But it's hard. I mean, it's hard. It would be unbecoming not to believe in becoming.
But what's to believe in? Becoming is becoming. It's tautological.
Yeah.
Where could there possibly be doubt?
Because we participate in it, we enthusiastically engage. This is what education and study and philosophy is all about, is to engage in the process of becoming with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your being. Engage in the process of becoming as a discipline. And
I embrace that also.
And that's what scientists do. That's what researchers do. That's what academics do.
So look at those who reject that.
Or do I have to?
No, there's a big social element that rejects that.
Yeah. There are a lot of unbecoming elements of our culture, concepts and people who are, manifestly unbecoming. Some of them we call criminals or evil or undesirables. But yeah, there's plenty of unbecoming features of our culture, and we would like to diminish the amount of unbecomingness and increase the amount of becomingness. And that's really what theology is trying to encourage. And not just, psychology. If you go into psychology or into therapy, it's the same thing. What stupid mistakes have I been making that's making me miserable? And what better practices, what better disciplines can I adopt going forward so that I don't have these same grief, the same sorrows as I've been experiencing? Go ahead, Sam.
Anybody else?
Can I just add on to the psychology part? It's a good thing to remember what Western scientific rationalists, psychologists, and various others around that nature have done to people they considered insane. Those behaviors are some of the worst crimes against humanity and animal kind.
Yeah.
And yet, this is often forgotten.
Yeah. There is unbecomingness even in those who are pastors or therapists. Sam.
Possibly, especially. But let's say this, okay? As a practice, science can lead us into lots of different paths. Obviously, some of those paths will prove to be non-optimal and in fact, possibly wrong. And we could even apply the word bad to a lot of it, okay? Yeah. But the practice itself doesn't necessarily need to be suspect. We can actually be critical of the practice of it while recognizing the wisdom of the practice. Clearly, even in religions, there are those who practice those badly.
Yep.
And yet, that's not the basis on which I criticize the religion. I would criticize the religion based on the fact that it doesn't grow, that it doesn't evolve, but not the fact that, someone actually practices it badly. Whereas it is free for all scientists and in fact, all observers to actually evaluate how that science is being practiced.
Yep.
And that openness is what makes it, possible for us to evolve. Science does not guarantee that we're always going to make, good hypotheses, good tools, good thinking. By no means. Look at the early days of psychology, like you guys are talking about. But if the continued practice helps us evolve beyond what we used to think 80, 90, 100 years ago, that is still the practice of science. Where is that mapping, that like behavior in religion? Are we to say that, religion as a source of truth reached its pinnacle 4,000, 5,000 years ago, and we've only been devolving since? Or where are those practitioners of religion who continue to understand more deeply the universe of today, even more insightfully or with more wisdom than that was available 4,000 or 5,000 years ago? Does that not happen in religion?
The Old Testament's only 3,500 years old, Sam. The first 5 books of Moses appeared about 3,500 years ago.
Okay, whatever. Make up a number. But Joel was about to speak.
Many of them are online.
Or
They
what?
talk of this stuff it's online. There's lots of YouTubers these days talking about the ancient knowledge and trying to teach people. I watch loads of them. They're really good. Some of them are amazing academics. Some of them are people who didn't go through academia, but are just as intelligent. But the problem for those people are the West has this ridiculous idea that for genii to study, they have to study through academia and get qualifications. But that's nonsense. Any genius can teach themselves the same knowledge that academia can teach, if not faster, because academia has a lot of ideologies that get in the way. Like having to prove to everybody else that it's true, which isn't the case. You don't have to prove anything to anyone else for the truth to be the truth. And if
Maybe,
the knowledge
but
is beyond...
You're not going to be able to help other people see the truth if you don't help them towards it.
Let's say that they don't have the potential yet to understand that level of awareness. Take quantum
Who are we to
theory
make that judgment?
Anyone that has the ability. If they attempt to teach somebody else multiple times and they still don't grasp it, then maybe today isn't the time for them to learn that lesson.
Okay. But then when?
Maybe a future generation for their lineage.
Okay. But why not try and, help that along?
You can try, but it will mean you'll have to teach a lower level of knowledge. It doesn't mean they'll grasp the height of it, but they might grasp enough to accept that, yes, that person over there gets this much better than me.
Right. And I think that's true of all bodies of thought, all schools of thinking. You have to teach, white belt before you get to yellow belt. You got to teach kindergarten before you get to first grade. You got to teach alphabets before you get to paragraphs. So would it not be a mistake for the teacher to start at a PhD level when the better thing to do would be to start at elementary level?
It comes a balance of who are you teaching and how much time do you have?
So we got now, we got us.
I mean, in general.
I mean, we only do what we each can do, right? We're each little hummingbirds, with our little drops of water.
One of the reasons I keep commenting is because the GCC is meant to be a collaborative group. But if you keep putting up posts that are showing you judgments that disagree with the knowledge of the religions themselves and that are showing a very shallow perspective of what's being judged, then that's not going to bring about collaboration. It's going to push away all of the people that are trying to say this doesn't conform to what we know.
Yes. I am conscious that I do that. And it is very deliberate because I have invited interaction on these topics for years. And if the interaction doesn't come, then the burden is on the claims. The burden of proof is on those who claim those claims. And if those people do not want to engage and show how the truth really is, then where's the basis? Where's the basis for that truth? Science will give you a foundation. Science will give you a basis. It'll give you a lot of observations, tests, practice, tools. In fact, the fact that we are engaging right now in conversation based on electrons that have certain, behaviors is a result of science and engineering. And so using that, we can explore other truths. But for those other truths to actually deny what science has given us is in a sense ironic.
But then again, we have to look at the level. Mystics from the religions and from the spiritualities were the scientists, not the followers.
They were trying to make sense of the universe, yes.
So if we've got science believers who are effectively what Dunning-Kruger proved, don't actually know that much about science, what's the truth of the others? That they've got their own people that don't actually know that much about the beliefs. So who do we always have to look to? The higher levels of it, because they're the ones with the knowledge and awareness. Yet those higher level people are ignored so that everybody can focus on the believers. Yet the mystics very clearly say in quite a lot of their writings, which aren't part of the main scriptures, to look at the scriptures as the totality of religious debate in any religion is barely scratching the surface. You've got to look at all the scholars of religion because they're still writing upon the scriptures. They're still the ones using the intellectual thought to look at them. Many of them talk of similar things as science.
So I will admit that I'm, let's say, a kindergartner here. Would you be willing to point me to something that would be understandable, that is being written by these current active scholars?
I could give you channels of scholars who are good at it, but even like there's a Jewish scholar I watch and he's a very good scholar. I put my hands down to it. He will scholar me to the end of the earth. But when it comes to some of the understandings of what he's teaching, he pulls faces that says, I don't understand this. And he admits that at times. He says, I don't understand what this is talking about. But because I'm using perception of synesthesia, I'm listening to the descriptions and going, well, that description matches what I see in this perception. And so there's occasional times when I'm grasping the concepts that's been spoken of, even though I didn't know the original Jewish context, because the description's the same.
Yep.
Like aeons and eons. It often sounds like electrons and atoms when they talk of them.
I'm open. Who is this guy?
His name's Justin something or other. Let me just get up my YouTube. His channel's called Esoterica.
Josh has his hand up.
I was just going to ask you a question, Sam, while Joe was looking.
Too many windows.
Is that okay, Joe?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about sacred geometry a few times, and then I sent you a link to After School, a breakdown of Randall Carlson's 2.5-hour lecture. I think it was in like 20 minutes, just really easy to comprehend. Did you ever get a chance to watch that? I was curious.
Let me see if I recall it. I do remember clicking on it. I don't remember how much of it I went through, but that was also weeks ago. So let me see if I can find that.
No problem. I was just trying to save you, like, if I do think one of the modern scholars of today that really understands ancient religions, science, geography, geology, blah, blah, blah. Randall Carlson is one of the top scholars, I think, of this modern age. So I just would welcome that to, it does piece together a lot of these ancient understandings and from religion to modern understandings of astronomy and science.
Okay, can I ask, Joel, is that a name you're familiar with?
Yeah, but I'm terrible with remembering names because I go through so many different people. I watch about 20 different channels for the religion and spiritual thing regular. I remember the channel names more because obviously I come to them more frequently than I do the people's name. That one. Too many windows, too many windows.
See, I think what you describe as the observations and experiences of the mystics, that's stuff that can be studied, you know? So I think it's perfectly within the realm of science or, you know, curious thought to explore those phenomena. What makes it impossible, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but what would make it impossible is if those phenomena, those experiences were relatively difficult to reproduce.
So here we come to a problem. Science has been studying synesthesia for about 70 years, I believe it is. And that's where your senses cross over to each other. So somebody can get taste from looking at color, or taste from textures, feeling them, or words have taste, or sound, and lots of combinations of this. But the people who have synesthesia don't all have the same form of it. My form is high dimensional synesthesia. So my knowledge is a dimensional image in my mind and I can visualize that, but it is dimensional. It's not abstract related. It's not pictures in the same sense of what could be easily painted. My taste turns into a dimensional image, my touch, my body senses.
Can I ask, what is a dimensional image?
It's literally a geometry. It's a viewed perception of that. So I can see all of my body's senses from an internal perspective, and it has color. And if I have like the hairs on my arm brushed, it looks like ripples of water from each hair going across the surface of what appears to be my arm. Or in my perception, I can focus in on the cones of my ears. And again, the same can be done there. I can focus on one cone or both cones. I can focus in and out of the cones, which changes the image. And I can look at the hairs of the cones, sending ripples into what effectively would be my conscious perception. But you've got to then think about that. That's the cones of my ears, the perception of my body senses, as well as a dimensional image of my knowledge, all being combined as part of my conscious perception of the world. And I've only got one form or maybe a couple of forms of synesthesia. There's people with completely different forms who see time and space in utterly different ways. I sit there and in awe of some of them because they just sound beautiful and amazing to look at. So if we're going to think about a time when there wasn't computers, who are the people that are going to be creating the knowledge of the religions? Are the people with abilities like synesthesia, who are viewing the world in a completely different way to everybody else. And I believe it's only 15% of the population who has the abilities. And that gets lower and lower depending upon the form. So high dimensional.
That sounds fascinating. I would love to know who's studying this.
There's actually a Facebook group with synesthesia, although then just normal synesthetes. And
in the meantime, let's note that Stacy's got her hand up, but whenever you're done, Joel.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to again highlight, like, and I know Joel is definitely recognized, as most of us are, recognizing that we need all voices in. We have the female voice. We just don't. I mean, and there's a lot of healing wisdom that is locked away in those populations. Just want to put that out there and urge you, especially you, Joel, since you're doing so much work, and to really look for those female voices that fit into this group of experts that you're listening to, because we need that.
A few of the channels I watch are female. They have the knowledge. In fact, Teal Swan is a spiritual expert. She's very well known, has millions of followers. Another one, what's her name?
I do follow her,
does
by the way.
channels
She
with
does make a lot of
Justy.
sense.
And I also want, one second, Barry, because this is also important. I want to also touch on what he said before about what happens to people like that and how we label them as crazy or insane or not worthy to listen to. And we have a real mental health problem, especially in our country. I was just talking to somebody. Every state has a different commitment process where you can lock someone away. What hospitals are doing now is they will actually have the second psychiatrist who's needed, not even living in the state, not even present, working for a hospital where you can call that person, they will okay a forcible commitment on somebody, and that's enough. This is a real issue, and I see this, I mean, it's totally a moneymaker. I mean, that's what it's about, and it's tied in with our healthcare system, and might as well highlight that too, because it's all interwoven. I'm sorry, Barry, you can go. These are just heavy on my mind.
I just wanted to provide an introduction to what Joel calls sacred geometry. Before it gets to sacred, let's just do mundane secular geometry. You can take an ordinary polynomial, like a function in x and x squared and x cubed, and you can, on Cartesian coordinates, draw a graph. And there is a one-to-one correspondence between the polynomial written in powers of x and the shape of a graph on a Cartesian coordinate. You can also go do that in more dimensions. So you can have a polynomial in two independent variables, and then you need a three-dimensional graph, and you can continue into higher dimensions just so that you can't easily draw the pictures. But mathematically, there's nothing stopping you from representing these two different representations of the same information. And these are called dual transformations. Fourier transform is a very powerful dual transformation between time domain and frequency domain. The same information is represented two distinct ways. So the notion that information can be transformed or translated into another domain, another representation, I mean, audio, so you can take an analog signal and you can make literally music that you can listen to. And this is part of 20th century technology. So this is a ubiquitous phenomenon, both in academics and in real life. But most people don't appreciate, you know, how profound it is that you can take music and then just make wiggles on a, you know, on an oscilloscope or on a phonograph record that contains literally the same information. So this notion of duality is extremely powerful, but the mathematics of it is daunting enough the average person doesn't even have basic awareness of it. Now, Sam, I know you do because you've got enough background in math because of your father and your own studies. But just going to higher dimensions, you know, you're talking about Hilbert space, you know, mapping something into Hilbert space, that's a, you know, very powerful tool in analysis, just putting it into one notation that you can work with and then transforming it back to a different notation in another version. So you have geometric interpretations and polynomial interpretations or function interpretations. Very powerful idea. And it's discoverable, it's documentable, it's teachable. Not very many people will get that far, but yeah, there it is.
Actually, I would disagree. I think most good high schools will teach all you need to know to understand what Barry just said.
Absolutely. Analytic geometry is what, a sophomore, I think, or sophomore in high school? I mean, you can bring up little mathematical applications where you can put a crank on a coefficient and the figure will go, or you can grab the figure and the coefficients will, you know, spin. And you can gain quite a bit of appreciation for the one-to-one relationship between the coefficients of a polynomial and the shape of a figure in the Cartesian coordinates.
Right. And by the way, it's not just a one-to-one mapping. These mappings can happen in almost uncountable ways.
Yes,
The
absolutely.
Pythagorean Theorem, for example, one of the most basic elements of thought in mathematics. There's over 400 different proofs
Right.
of the Pythagorean Theorem. Most people don't even know one. And yet it's really basic to living in this world that we live in.
Right. But don't apply it to the globe. You've got to change it. You can't use it on a sphere. You have to use it on a flat plane. If you want to do celestial navigation on the surface of the earth, you've got to use something a little bit more evolved than just the simple Pythagorean version of the theorem.
Pythagoras never said it was to be used for navigating the moons and the stars.
Probably not.
Joel?
He lived in flatland. Joel's got Joshua has his hand.
Josh? Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're just listening to you guys talk math makes me realize when we go into multidimensional domains, like when Joel's talking about synesthesia or we're talking about Fourier transforms and modeling, within any domain, you can start to map against other things. So you can map the Kabbalah to the Torah to the Tao to some ancient writings of Cheng Su. I mean, these mappings, it's only your own inability to see the transformation from one model to another that keeps you from flexing across multiple domains. And when I say multiple domains, I mean science, religion,
Right.
geography,
Yep.
astronomy, astrology, linguistics.
Yep.
True system thinking is the ability to map across all domains and then come up with a model that can be understood from the beginning to the end.
Right.
And with that, I'm complete. Thank you.
Yeah, see, Josh, I would agree with you. I think there's a risk in there. The risk in there is knowing that even though that mapping is possible, that you know the right mapping. That's the risk. To assume that you know the right mapping is hubris. You have to be very careful about that, and you have to actually show that that mapping is quote unquote valid / correct. And most people don't even ask that question. Over.
Just to be clear, I said very clearly one of the examples was the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah, I wasn't
And-
saying you were wrong. I was agreeing with you. I was saying
don't
one
worry,
of the
relax. I'm not
extrapolation.
going to argue with you. I'm not going to
Okay.
argue. This isn't a battle. This isn't a
No,
battle.
no.
This isn't
I
about.
mean-
This is a sharing of knowledge here. So the big word right and wrong keeps you from mapping across domains.
I don't understand that.
So what I'm saying is if you take out the possibility of something being right or wrong, so if you're in a vector space, let's just mathematically graph it out. If you're moving in a specific mathematical formula and you're going from one point to another point, if you're using that math incorrectly, you're wrong to get to this point. But imagine that there's 17 different mathematical ways to get to that point. So what might be wrong in one form of math is right in another. So the flexibility of movement across domains allows the ability for no right or wrong to ever be uttered by another person. It just is, it's becoming. And
Okay,
because
so
you don't
that's-
know the
that's
other
where
domain.
I don't understand. I will admit,
know it's
that's where I do
confusing.
not understand. Okay, because if you understand that there are 17 different perspectives, then you understand when to do one mapping and when not to do a mapping. And then that is, in a sense, saying, okay, this mapping is right, this mapping is not right. If you understand those distinctions between those particular transforms. But that
I'd
doesn't
add to that.
negate the usefulness of these notions of right and wrong.
It's not see, that's what I'm saying. The whole concept of negating or right or wrong, if you take that out of the equation, then I can make sense to you. But as long as you have higher or lower, better or worse, right or wrong in that concept, it'll never make sense. Does that make sense?
No, not to me.
Okay. Perfect. And I
Because
just,
I do have a notion of truth. I do have a notion of computability. I do have a notion of reason that can be, performed on axioms and on observations. So to me, there is a way to say this follows or this does not follow, or this computes or that does not compute, or this is decidable or that's not decidable, or this is computable or that's not computable, or this is right or this is wrong. Those are very meaningful statements in the frames of reference that I work in, okay? So in the frames of reference where those statements are not possible, I'm still struggling to see the utility.
Okay, can I add to that? So if there is 17 different views, and all of those 17 different views are right, but to understand those views, you need to understand the labeling system and perception those views were created from.
I
If
agree.
one of those 17 views goes, no, my view is right and is the only right view, then they're going to judge the other 16 as wrong.
Yes, I would agree
Because
with
they're
that.
not bothering to go, well, I don't have the specific view to look at this right.
Okay, the difference is after that statement, there's still a possible question, which is the one I'm asking, which is show me how I could expand my thinking. Show me how if I relax this statement that I just made, that I can actually understand more. But I'm looking for information. I'm looking for thoughts that make sense. I'm looking for strings of thoughts that string together in a consistent way to create a model that makes sense. And I'm looking for how that maps to the real world. And if those things are not available, then I can say, okay, fine, that's useful for you, but I still don't get it.
Okay, a simple one is the difference between the spiritual conception of life and the scientific conception of life. I can't remember the precise definition of the scientific conception. It's changed a few times because it didn't fit life they found.
Because science continues to learn.
So there's the science definition of what life is, which has changed a number of times, and yet the spiritual conception of life is flow. Simply just flow. That is life to the spiritual, to the original traditional spiritual perceptions. All life is just flow. That hasn't changed apart from where science has tried to interfere. So if we still hold on to that concept, life is still just flow. Science has had to change its concept, the spiritual haven't. Because to them, all flows of existence is life.
Spiritual schools of thought use that definition?
No, but a lot of the ancient traditions did, especially from traditions of the North Americas, and when you start going back to those kinds of perceptions.
See, I fundamentally don't see any barrier between those statements. I don't see any inconsistency there. I see something that's very possibly leanable into or lean into-able. I don't, sorry, English is not a great language for me right now. However, what I object to is when I lean in and people stop answering my questions. That's what I find fascinating. I think the inquiry process is a useful one. It spurs conversation, it spurs exploration, it spurs examination of differences and disagreements and misunderstandings. That's where fun is. That's where the fun of conversation is. But if those answers are, well, you're just never going to get it, and then a departure, then that stops my growth, at least in that particular direction. Now, you're saying you could actually plant some seeds and I could actually watch and nurture those seeds and grow myself. Okay, fine. I get that, okay? That's true across all dimensions, all domains. But if I'm actually leaning into yours and saying, help me, it would help if I'm actually, assisted in some way. And if I'm open to that, then I'm trying to say, I'm giving this serious consideration. I'm really trying to learn. I'm really trying to grow here.
I'm really listening to what you're saying deeply, Sam. And what keeps coming up for me, and I'll just say it, and this is not being snarky or anything, is sometimes It's not about Sam's perception or Joel's perception or mine. There's something in between all of that. And that to me is what I heard you asking at the beginning of the conversation. Can we get to in collaborology where opinions, snarkiness, and all that just go away and we get to a truth in between all of those things?
Yes.
And I think where we've made the most progress is when the question has been so poignantly asked and so clearly understood by each other that we can expand upon it and get to the point where I don't know the answer, but I get the question, pass it off to Tice, and Tice says, okay, and expands, and we pass it to Barry, to Joel, to Sam, and to Stacy, and we ping pong it around. And in doing so, those questions that you have sometimes are thought that you're asking this question, but really you're asking that one. So I would love for a clarification of the questions that you've asked that no one here in the room has been able to answer, if you don't mind.
I'm not even sure which ones you're talking about. I think I started with
The ones that you're leaning in, like, okay, that makes sense, but those things that you're leaning into, if that helps.
I think the leaning is always in a direction where I do not understand. I have some curiosity. Others appear to have some insight. I don't yet have those insights. And I'm looking to see whether or not my growth is possible in that direction. Now, I'm not sure that was the way I stated the question, but that's what's underneath the question.
Yeah, and just for me, I feel you leaning, but not, you haven't fully reached the wall and touched it. So the question's about to be asked, but it's not fully there. Like you've said, okay, who is this person that said that? And what is the, let's go into a PhD study of their life's work and their real understanding of it. And does that have any validity in any other aspect of work in science or culture or religion? Let's really look and examine some of these people's work, because it is life, not just one person's life's work, but it goes back to generational life's work. So to just dismiss it in 1 second and go, that doesn't make sense, science disproves that, is dismissing the crux of a person's true life work. Like Doug Engelbart, if I was just to dismiss him as go, oh, the guy that invented the mouse, yeah, he's nobody. Like that would just be no way to talk about Doug Engelbart's work. So if you have questions, I would love to hear your questions, or anybody hears questions deeply about things that we don't fully understand individually that we could understand as a group collective. With that, I'm complete.
If I recall, I think I did ask who these people were, and Joel did provide at least 3 links to those people. And I think you also gave me one from Randall, what was his name? Randall
Carson.
Right. So there's at least 4 that I can follow up on, which is great. I've gotten something out of this conversation.
Okay. I'm just saying I just put in modern people. I'm just saying that when Joel says, can you say it again, Joel, in your own words? You say like the ancient mystics, or how would you say, we're talking about people that like the Yellow Emperor, the people that taught the Yellow Emperor, if that makes sense. Like, who are these people? Sometimes we can't define them. I was wondering if, who taught the Buddha? Like the Buddha's teachers.
Taught the Buddha.
He figured it out for himself.
That's
he had
part
teachers.
Of the thing. People talk of being enlightened and awakened, but did they truly understand those 2 concepts from the highest level of spirituality? And the answer is no. Buddhism has the bodhisattva, which is essentially their version of a godlike being. They are self-realized beings who attain a level of knowledge through practice that is beyond everybody else's. They become perceptually aware of something way beyond description at times. They have experiences through often near-death experiences. The Buddha, I think I remember the story, he went around a load of different places looking for answers, and he was currently on the process of severe fasting. and he had a near-death experience. So if he went to the point of nearly dying, passing out, well, we know something very particular about that, and that's that the brain releases DMT. So the Buddha got to the point where his own body produced enough DMT, he had a DMT experience.
What does DMT stand for?
Dimethyltryptamine.
Dimethyltryptamine.
It's one of the severe
It's the spirit
hallucinogens.
molecule.
Yes.
I thought that was
Whatever.
endorphins.
So this is true in quite a lot of the cases. The people go through situations where they experience near-death experience.
Yeah.
Or they
Be
just
good to
have
experience a near life
perceptual
experience.
ability. People with synesthesia to the right level. I mean, sound makes an image to me. So all of my life, I've been able to see high-dimensional fluid interactions and tried to explain it to people to only be called arrogant because I didn't have an academic qualification. I didn't even have decent high school qualifications, and I was daring to explain fluidic interaction to people who saw themselves as more qualified than me. I was confused my whole life why, when I was trying to explain these things that they were very obvious to me, why I was having engineers and scientists tell me I was wrong. And yet since then, that science has actually been proven with like cymatics and fluid interactions that have been discovered through computer use of finite element analysis.
Right.
It was confusing. I didn't understand that other people didn't see the world in that way. And when I learned of spiritual knowledge, a lot of it connected to what I was seeing. I looked in the spiritual knowledge and was like, well, why isn't science noticing these geometry relations that are effectively just physics? Because they hadn't got to that point using computers.
Isn't it amazing how uniquely individually our processors are processing this reality and taking it in and writing the story within our own brain? And I've heard this story from many people that they just thought. I just listened to a comedian the other day. He has a disorder where he only sees half out of one eye and 100% out of this eye, and this half is actually going away. So there's a name for this discretion, but he didn't know his whole life that he was the only one experiencing only seeing out of one eye. So you have to ask yourself this question about our processors, meaning our brains and our neurons that are firing, of how we're perceiving information and putting it back to our rods and cones and then interpreting it into a story of how we used language. Like my friend calls it, brain damaged language monkeys is what all people are. But we're all brain damaged language monkeys in a sense that we're not able to, the greatest poets, the Wordsworths, the Longfellows, the Shakespeare's, to take language and interpret how our perceiving of our emotional state, of what it feels like to look at the rain coming down off of the roof, or a winter storm, or I could wax poetic about beautiful light reflecting off of a lake and shining back the entire sky onto the lake. But how do you share that individual understanding of your life with other people? Meaning, imagine if we all had a card of different colors and we all placed it on top of each other, and it was a see-through card. So imagine it's an emotion disc. Is that making sense to people? You have a piece of plastic with a different color, and everyone in this room put it on top, and we all look through it together. Would that be a collaboration of each other's paradigm? Like, how do we truly take each other's superpowers and overlay them on top of each other so we can not only see the individual perceptions, but the whole together? I would challenge the group to try to come up with some sort of practice or experiment to see if we can look at something from each one of our perspectives and see if we can, at the end, see it better than we could individually.
The
Here's a fun one.
The Rashomon experiment.
Why do men and women argue about color so often? Because women are more
Aesthetics.
likely to have more color cones and see a greater distinction in color than men do. So they see the color differently. And women are also more likely to have the fifth color cone, which allows them to see millions of color distinctions. It's still a very rare percentage, but it's even rarer in men to have that ability. So just with the color, the arguments men and women have had for generations that have caused silly little arguments and round arguments for hours is something related to our biology, that our eyes just pick up color differently.
Sam?
So I like the fact that you're bringing in the biology of perception, and Josh, you're also bringing in the biology of perception and thought. And I would actually then very, very much acknowledge that, because I've been fascinated, and I watched multiple times Robert Sapolsky's videos on the biological foundations of human behavior. Specifically, he's got one called The Biological Foundations of Religiosity. I may have the name wrong, but he's actually trying to understand what, or trying to elucidate and convey how religious thought, and particularly people with religious fervor, share some biological aspects that we previously were unaware of. And I find that fascinating because, as you mentioned, Joel, there are DMT releases, if indeed that's the case, with one's fasting or with one's consumption of certain chemicals, or, induced differences in mental state by, you name it, weed, ayahuasca, psilocybin, whatever, okay? That we can experience different phenomena. Sometimes people call these spiritual. And if we sort of understand this, that there's a biological foundation to a lot of this, we can still ask the question, how much of the biology explains what we see, and how much is left unexplained? So that's pushing the envelope further. That is science. Over.
It's also mysticism. Science originally came from the mystics. And it was a
So what is
development,
mysticism? How would you define mysticism?
effectively exactly the same as science, but they did it using a slightly different process with a slightly different idea set. Most of them didn't believe in teaching everybody the knowledge. That's why it used to be called esoteric knowledge, because you needed a level of awareness that was only taught from the high levels to the high levels.
Might there also be another explanation
Yeah.
that power is usurped and coveted?
Well, that's also true. But if you recognize from a position of wisdom that the vast majority of the people around you aren't wise enough to have the knowledge, because they'll just do things that are, let's say, planet destroying with it, isn't it a bit wise to keep that knowledge away from those people, because they'll destroy the planet with it?
Why not
Which
teach?
group of people have suddenly decided that teaching everybody the knowledge, regardless of whether we work out if they're wise, the knowledge that has destroyed our planet? In fact, the knowledge that has been used for profit to destroy our planet. Was it wise? No. And yet we still insist with the idea that we can teach everybody the extremely dangerous knowledge and just have it available to all, when the unscrupulous will just do the profit thing. So they profit because they don't care.
So I think we've migrated away from the central point. I mean, I agree with you about capitalism and democracy. Neither is a good system, in my opinion. But I think this is sort of now strayed away from the way the original question was. I'm not saying that's a quote unquote bad thing. I'm just saying it just happened. I'm just observing it. But Josh has his hand up.
Yeah, I just keep thinking of a TED talk I just recently saw about the future of medicine and mRNA medicine, and the idea of sending it to your body to repair itself with proteins. And I just think that concept alone is something really worth leaning into. And when Joel talks about these mystics, maybe there were ancient people, or maybe there are people that live today, modern people, that can send a message to their body to repair anything. And that knowledge is something they have within themselves, just like Joel could see things a certain way, or maybe Stacy perceives things a certain way, but they can't explain it, but they know how to do it for themselves. It's not for the masses, but it's a knowledge. And science is learning how to do it by identifying these protein molecules and identifying the off and on switches that allow your own building blocks of your body, these microtubulars, to create and form proteins in a way that fixes things that are making the body work inefficiently or causing disease. So if we look at it that way, maybe mysticism and science are making the singularity, much like digital and analog world of, potential for artificial intelligence or biological life in a digital world. Maybe these are all culminating into the same thing. And at the end, the final thing at the end, that singularity, is quote unquote spirit, God, science. I don't know what you want to call it. Maybe it's a dream of a guy named Bob and we're all living in Bob's dream. I don't know. But there is something at the very end of it all that coalesces. And then, like Joel said, it'll be broken apart again back into tribalism and forgotten. And we'll all have to learn it over and over again throughout time and history. So just think about science isn't separate from mysticism. It's the same exact thing with just different languaging. Go ahead, Sam.
So I would actually welcome that. To me, if we were going to even co-vision that and co-create that, it requires some kind of interaction between those of us that have bits and pieces of it. And that's called communication. That's potentially called collaboration. And that's what I'm leaning into. There's nothing in what I say that dismisses one claim versus another. But the questions will always ask about the basis for those claims. That's what I'm trying to do when I'm practicing what I understand science to be. Barry?
Compare mysticism to something much more mundane. Consider a scientist or a mathematician who's working from intuition or conjecture or working hypothesis, something that they somehow sense to be correct, but it's not knowledge yet because they don't know it's correct and they don't know how to demonstrate it or prove it. And always in mathematics and science, we have intuition and conjecture and unproven would-be theorems that haven't yet been demonstrated to be true. We live in a sea of beliefs which appear to be plausible, haven't been ruled out, haven't been demonstrated to be true. And mystics were basically just another synonym for people who had these insights that they would articulate, but they couldn't explain why you should believe them. They couldn't prove them or demonstrate them. They just seemed to be, they made sense in some way that's difficult to articulate. That's it.
One example of that, some of you may know, is I think a guy named Java Jack. I don't know how many of you guys have heard of this guy. This guy claims to be able to use his own personal energy to inflame a piece of paper with no matches, with nothing else, okay? And that, people can use needles to pierce him. He feels no pain. He's just got a number of claims. Now, so a university or a group of scientists in Sweden went to Java to film and live with this guy for months, possibly years, and really study and film and really understand what's kind of going on. Their conclusion was, there's something here we don't understand. Jack was not able to explain how he does what he did. And in fact, he got in trouble with his teacher for even showing scientists what he was able to do. He was not supposed to. And so after he had that little admonishment from his teacher, he disappeared and they can't find him again. I'm not saying he was killed. I'm just saying, he probably just didn't want to interact again and be filmed again. But I am saying these are phenomena that are curious to lean into. Now, on the other hand, he may have been a great con man, who knows, right? But he wasn't able to fool this team of scientists and photographers from Sweden. So these guys thought there was something there. That's the kind of leaning in I'd like to see. So by no means am I saying this is impossible. I'm just saying, let's find out more. Let's learn more. Now, here's another story. The Jiao Tai Chi instructor I had, I've been on and off a student of his for a while. About 2 or 3 years into my studies with him, he was, well, clearly he was relatively new to the country. He was new to driving cars. He got in a very bad car accident. Now, I didn't know until weeks later. And these are, stories students tell, but, other people, they claim, would have died in that car accident. The claim is that he slowed his metabolism down, he breathed more slowly, he, allowed his body to at least stay alive long enough for help to arrive, and then recovered. So these are things I'm really, really fascinated to lean into, okay? I myself find, that the practice of Tai Chi gives a sense of autonomy in my limbs that is fascinating. I don't know that I've ever told you guys this story one time when I was going to a football game at Stanford. And I was with 2 friends. This is 2011. This is the Stanford Cal game where Andrew Luck actually lost to Cal. But anyway, there's a guy who was clearly drunk, probably about 40, 50 feet away, but it kept, being loud and kept being obstreperous, and he kept getting closer and closer and closer. Till, finally he was like in my face, yelling and, whatever at me. And I didn't even think. All I did was do a variation of circle hands like clouds, and I was able to get his wrist and his elbow so that if he objected and he fought back, he could have broken his own elbow. And then I guided him probably 20 feet away, and then I let him go. This is not premeditated. This is not, I didn't say, okay, let's wait for this guy to get here so I'm going to do this on him. There's nothing like that. It was just, even without thinking, simply because circle hands like clouds is just such a natural move at that moment. So there are things that are difficult to explain, but they're still studyable. And you still lean into them. So by no means am I saying, let's throw out all these claims. I'm just saying, teach me the basics. Teach me what the foundation is. Show me. That's all I'm asking. Over.
I
Stacey or
think we
Josh?
oh, sorry. Did you want to go, Stacey?
Yeah, I can't reach my button, so I can.
No problem. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just real quickly, I want to go back just to keep it out there as like a caution. Joel at one point said that we don't listen to the people with the wisdom because we're focused on their followers. And I am guilty of that, and something I work on all the time. And I want to tie that as well to the idea that we're talking about everybody having a piece that we have to get from. And I just want to mention that there's 6 people here and only one of them is female. And again, I'm going to just keep throwing that in. And that I'm complete.
I'm glad you've come to that, because I've actually got a note to talk on this very subject. So,
good.
Someone I talked to recently who has a lot of knowledge in the spiritual views, his view of the knowledge is different. It's what would be seen as the feminine perspective, whereas my view's more of a combination of the both, but it more leans to the masculine perspective. So even amongst men and women, there are men who have a more feminine perspective of the knowledge than the masculine, and vice versa. But there's a point in history where certain religious groups turned on the feminine. In fact, quite a few of them did. But there's still the feminine perspective, and the old feminine knowledge is there. It becomes a balance of what aspects of perception you're looking at more. Some religions say that the feminine came first, some say that the masculines came first, some say that they were unified and one. And then it's basically a difference between what they see the feminine as and what they see the masculine as, which we can turn to evolution for, and have a look at the different species in the world, and look at how different the female of the species and the male of the species act. Or even within that, there is the difference within the females of each species and the females from a different line of the species, etc. So, I mean, the female lionesses act different than female tigers, and male tigers act different to male lions. So even within evolution and the spectrum of life, we've got a whole spectrum of the way that the male and the female act. In some species, the female acts what would be known more as masculine, and the male acts more as feminine. We've got the same true in our species. We have very effeminate men and very masculine women. But our particular culture changed this and said that men should be masculine and women should be feminine, which it doesn't work, as we've seen in modern society. That's just not how it works. The truth is, the reality of it was, when you go to the spiritual conception, it's masculine energy, feminine energy. And the relationship to science in this would be the feminine energy is estrogen and the masculine energy is testosterone. And just to finish the point, if people do different exercises or different activities, it changes the production of estrogen and testosterone. So heavy leg exercises produces testosterone, and women drinking too much alcohol produces testosterone, whereas caring duties such as looking after the old, looking after the young, they produce estrogen. So even within our biology, what we do changes the balance of the masculine energy and feminine energy, or the production of estrogen and testosterone.
Thank you for that. And I want to let Josh go, but I just want to say one thing. Just in my observation, traveling in different groups, that's basically what I do. I want to say that what I've seen, the one group that I've seen really digging into this feminine wisdom is the Black community. And interestingly enough, look what we don't have here. I don't see any Black people in our community, and hardly any women. And that's where I'm getting a lot of, I'm hearing a lot of wisdom making the surface. Go ahead, Josh. So thank you for letting me go.
Yeah, I can go on the same thing you just said. I don't see any Puerto Ricans in here. I don't see my Haitian brothers and sisters here. In other words, there's so few of us here that we're missing a large swath of people on this planet. And I don't see anyone under the age of 10 here. Where's my 9-year-olds at? I mean, we're missing a lot of different people. I don't see, where's all of my grandmas? Where's all I only see 0 grandmas, where are my grandmas at?
But my point is, Josh, we could still be bringing that information that we're getting to the group.
My point is that we've never even formed a group yet. So I did bring 2 people to the group. I brought Tyra and I brought Kayla. Those are 2 happen to be women. One of them happens to be Polynesian. One of them happens to be, I don't know what Tyra's background is, but that's not the point. The point is that I don't think we're here trying to recruit a swath of everybody on this planet and trying to represent like a United Nations. And if we are, let's do that. Is that what you're suggesting, Stacey?
No, not at all. I'm not talking about forming a group. I'm talking about in our own individual explorations to be conscious of seeking out wisdom from different groups and putting them together in it for ourselves.
I'm right there with you. I try that my best. And I was just in 17 different group calls before I came on here. I've been up since 4 a.m. and I was on 17 group calls with people from the Ukraine, people from different parts of China, from Shanghai. There was also people from Taiwan. I was in many, many different, from older Black women to you name it. I was just in all those calls. So I just want to say is if we want to be represented by a lot of different voices, we need to make the effort to reach out to those voices on a collective basis of who we know in those different groups so we can ask them and invite them all together. Does that make sense? So that
It does, and I think I'm looking at it differently. Instead of trying to bring them in, I'm going there. I'm joining their group.
correct. I'm doing the same thing, just so you know. And then I'm trying to bring those voices and wisdoms to this group, whether it be feminine or masculine or old or young, as best I can. It's not easy. I'm just saying.
A lot of
But
the
any,
spiritual,
yeah,
a lot
I
of the
just
spirit-
think, go ahead, Joel, sorry.
a lot of the spiritual groups I talk to over here, most of the female energy is running the group. There's plenty of different people, especially English people, females who are teaching what is they call new moon spirituality, which is all surrounding obviousnesses of a new moon cycle, and it's all teaching female perspective of the menstrual cycle and what they go through. And one of my friends in particular teaches about going silent for 3 days, which she found to be a very enlightening process, that when she's about to start her cycle, she then completely shuts off the world and she even doesn't really talk and she's with herself. So there's quite a few people I've seen in these groups who are starting to teach this kind of knowledge, as well as they tend to be the most focused on the caring side of the knowledge. And they do teach like ancient American tribal knowledge. And I spend as much time as I can learning all sides of this. As I said earlier, I see the being the masculine and the feminine view and the spectrum in both. So a lot of what I try to teach does include that.
And before Sam, I see your hands up to speak, is I'd like to honor what is here, not what's missing, but what is present before we look at what's missing, and just honor what is here. Meaning we have people from different countries, from different tribal, different parts of America. I'm, in California, Sam's in Seattle. We've got Barry over on the East Coast. Joel's from England, Tice is from Denmark, Stacy's in New York. Like, just from geographic to cultural backgrounds to male, like just what is available in our differences and how beautiful that is. And what we can add to complement this, not what's missing from us, what we're deficient of, but what can help add to. I just wanted to bring that
The
up.
room is
Thank you.
half full, right?
I don't know. I'd love to see 1 million people here, but for me, yeah, I just find when you try to look for what's not something, you'll always find the not. But if you appreciate what the is, then it allows for more to come in.
So may I change the subject slightly?
Sure.
Not because I don't like the subject. I actually very much enjoy this. So thanks for coming, Joel, and everybody else. But given the happenstances of this week, I thought maybe I would ask the question, would we like to give thoughts and prayers to Uvalde, Texas? And I say that sarcastically.
I mean, it's very depressing. What was it? Two mass murders in what, 2 or 3 weeks?
It's been 3 in like 10 days.
It's just 3 in 10 days. It's just very depressing.
I'm also focusing on this habit of, thoughts and prayers.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
the
that's a very
whole
sad
thing
news.
about prayer and meditation is looking for divine insight or just insight into how to handle something. And if all you're doing is just mouthing of hopes and prayers, you're not really doing what the meditation is supposed to be doing, which is inspiring you to figure out how to handle something that's challenging.
And as a parent of a child killed in Uvalde, how do they appreciate thoughts and prayers?
Hard to say. I wouldn't want to psychologize on that. I think it probably varies. Although you may have seen some of the ads from this, was it the Sandy Hook parents have been producing public service announcements. And they're coming out, it was 10 years later, they're coming out in favor of, we need to get off our asses and fix this problem, this gun violence in America problem. They don't want thoughts and prayers, they want us to change our culture.
If I might invoke a Dalai Lama quote, which I just shared this week, change happens via action,
Right,
i.e., parenthetically, not thoughts and prayers.
exactly.
Peace, did you want to say something?
Peace had a hand up. Peace, you're on mute.
Yes, Kayla had a post in Facebook mentioning all schools, universities. Maybe it's a list where all these atrocities happened. I don't know. A long list, but I could not check on all this because I'm not American. So you might understand all these names of universities and schools.
So
Might
many
be
of
the
those
list
are unfamiliar to me.
where people were killed. I don't know.
Has a relationship to something else that's pretty sad, and that's the number of people killing themselves. Just yet again, there's a cliff face not too far from here, and it's a current regular occurrence that people are jumping off it. It's people are broken. They don't like the way society is. They don't like how they're treated. I struggle with certain things myself, but had that struggle earlier in life, and so it's not an option that comes to mind, but I understand its desire, and that's because I felt completely rejected by society, and I've been through things that society would still judge, and I'm fearful that people becoming aware of those things would stop them interacting with me without figuring out my side of the story as well.
So Joel, I'm not asking for details, but do you have people that you are able to share that with?
A few. I try to be honest as I can be, but at the same time, I've spent
Remember, the force
sorry.
will be with you, always.
Computer, shut up.
I've spent a lot of time studying culture, and I've watched everything that's gone on through mob mentality and people just accepting one side of the story and acting. So I know that I've seen that the culture would just believe the other side first and then act. And part of that has been part of my life as well. I have had people believe one side of a story, and then that's brought about an entire traumatic experience for me. I mean, I've been accused of things, and it's brought the police in my life. Made it so that I had to question whether I was going to lose my job, lose my girlfriend, and there was nothing I could do about it. But it was an accusation made by someone who either wanted money or was trying to defend themselves, or was making up a story to make themselves better in the situation. It's very easy for people to believe something that's not true because they want it to be true and don't like the person it's been said about.
Stacey?
Yeah, I want to shift a little. And Joel, I know what you're talking about because you shared it once with us in a smaller private group, and I understand. But I just want to shift a little bit because, you know, it's Memorial Day in the States, and we have a habit of, you know, thanking veterans for their service. And I'm thinking we should be apologizing to them for putting them into those situations. And honestly, I haven't even been able to, like, I wanted to post that sentiment, And I just know that if I do, I'm gonna get like backlash of not being respectful or like all this bullshit, when I'm very respectful. But I recognize what we're, I mean, there's a big contradiction here. So violence is violence is violence. And yeah,
So if you do post it, I will support it. I will post the same.
thank you, but we'll see.
And I'm speaking even though my mom is a veteran herself.
And we owe them an apology.
We owe a lot of apologies. The Indigenous, Native Americans, the Blacks, the Vietnamese. I mean, we have done a lot of damage domestically and internationally over the course of this country and over the course of our own lifetimes.
Certain countries just waged war for 22 years and still aren't fully out of those countries, and yet are demonizing another country for being at war for a few months.
Yeah.
Over the same sort of scenario. It's an economic war. It was never about what we were told they were about. And yet, if we look to what those other countries did for the 22 years, they used torture, they used black ops operatives, they hired mercenaries, they used depleted uranium munitions, and yet they've just complained about one country using a thermobaric bomb. Like, how does that not compare to using depleted uranium munitions that spread radiation over other countries that weren't even involved in the war? At least the thermobaric bomb, can't say it properly. At least that's a relatively precise weapon. It's an implosion bomb, isn't it? So it hit its target and everything got sucked in.
It's grim.
I see depleted uranium as being far worse because that's going to have much longer lasting consequences. 50 to 100 years before the radiation stops having a major effect. God is red. What? What does that mean?
God is red. That rhymes with God is dead. I don't know.
No, it's a book written by an indigenous leader. It turns out it was a reading that my daughter did in college. And it's a critique of Western Christianity in the frame of reference of indigenous people's thinking.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned indigenous people, Barry. I just started it yesterday because she just sent me the book yesterday. And even just the first few pages, I find I'm quite resonant with. It's almost top of the hour. I just want to let you know, Barry, all of you guys, Barry, you're a very consistent visitor here, and I really engage well with you. I really like it. Stacy, I find not enough opportunities to really get into one-on-ones with you, and I like the way you approach these subjects. Josh, you and I have had moments, but I appreciate the thoughts that you bring. Joel, I know you and I have had moments, but I really appreciate you coming here today, because I think this is the kind of conversation I think we need to do when people have misunderstandings and have disagreements. So thank you very much for coming today. Peace.
That one.
Huh?
Misunderstandings. People very often mistake my behaviors. That you called what I was doing snarky when I put Dunning-Kruger, and it wasn't meant to be snarky. It was just, oh, this is a relationship to Dunning-Kruger. And I had something similar not long ago. I tried to explain the differences in types of women and how they perceived. And I sort of explained how a female boxer had lost sexual attraction for a boyfriend, but the person took me as trolling. And that wasn't my intention at all. I was just trying to describe the science and the relationships behind what I was commenting on. So what I'm doing is very often taken as a completely different behavior, and I'm very confused as to the sort of perception.
So I'll claim I'm guilty of trolling you. The use of the word snarky and the use of certain other words was kind of trying to see if we could actually spark a conversation. So it's not necessarily misinterpretation. Peace, thank you also. You always take very good notes. You follow up one-on-one with me a lot with very insightful research. I really very much appreciate that also.
Gosh,
Yeah.
And by the way, since I'm checking out, I have a puppy birthday party to go to. The first batch of puppies actually turns 4, believe it or not. And so we usually do 2 parties a year. We do one around end of May, which was when the first batch of puppies was born. And we do one around the end of September, which is when the second batch of puppies was born. So we do 2 birthday parties, and there's 8 puppies coming today. So I got to get ready for that and get some snacks for the birthday party.
I just wanted to point out from the first time I met you, Sam, that you're looking for people that you know, like, and trust, and that you can have common ground with and collaborology. And I think you've created that. I think let me know if you have not, but I think you got it. So congratulations.
Thanks for that mention as well. Anybody else want to check out? Or do you guys want to continue?
Looks like we're all done.
Many thanks.
Good day, evening, morning, all.
Cheers.
All in different time zones.